My name is Madeline Harper. I'm 30 years old. And the strange thing about ending a relationship that once felt like home is that it rarely feels like an ending when it begins. At first, it feels like a disagreement, something small, manageable, something you think you can fix if you just explain yourself better. It started with a sentence: "I'm not going to your college reunion." Ethan said it casually, too casually, like he was commenting on the weather, not quietly shifting the ground under our relationship. I remember blinking at him from across the kitchen. What? Why? He didn't look at me right away. He was scrolling through his phone, jaw slightly tight. "I checked the Facebook group," he said. "Your ex is going to be there." I let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it didn't make sense yet. Okay. He went to the same school. That's not exactly shocking. Ethan finally looked up at me, and there was something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. "I don't trust you around him." That was the moment. Not the argument that came after. Not the ultimatum. That sentence, "I don't trust you." It landed heavier than anything else he said that night. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. For the moment, he'd smirk and say he was kidding. He didn't. "I'm serious, Maddie," he continued. "I know how you talk about college. Like it was the best time of your life. All those memories, all those people." "That doesn't mean anything," I said slowly. "It means everything," he snapped. "Reunions are where people get nostalgic. They drink. They reconnect. They make mistakes." I felt something shift inside me. A quiet, uncomfortable awareness. "My ex-boyfriend is married, Ethan. He has a kid. I haven't spoken to him in 5 years." That's what everyone says before they cheat. I blinked. "I'm not everyone." Silence stretched between us. Thick, unfamiliar. "I'm not going," he said finally. "And I don't think you should go either." We had been planning that reunion for months. 3 days. Friday mixer, Saturday events, formal dinner, Sunday brunch. I had bought 2 tickets, $185 each, booked a hotel, requested time off work. I had been excited, not because of my ex, but because of everything else. The friends I hadn't seen in years, the version of myself I used to be, the memories that still felt warm when I thought about them. And now, "Ethan, the tickets are non-refundable." "Then lose the money," he said flatly. "I don't care." I stared at him. "You're serious?" "If you go to that reunion," he continued, his voice tightening, "knowing he's going to be there, knowing how I feel about it, that tells me everything I need to know about your priorities." Fizz. I sat down slowly, because suddenly I felt tired. Not physically, emotionally. Like I had just realized something I couldn't unsee. "I understand," I said quietly. His shoulders relaxed almost immediately. "Thank you," he said. "I knew you'd—" "No," I interrupted. "I understand that you don't trust me." The relief disappeared from his face. After 3 years together, that's what he believed about me. That I would throw everything away for a man I hadn't spoken to in half a decade. "That's not what I—" "You think I'd cheat on you at a reunion," I continued, my voice steady now, "with someone I dated for a year and a half when I was 21. I'm protecting our relationship." "No," I said, "you're controlling it." The word hung between us. Sharp, uncomfortable. "So what?" he asked. "You're going anyway?" "Yes." The answer came easier than I expected. "I'm going alone, apparently, but I'm going." His expression hardened. "If you go to that reunion, we're done." 3 years. Vacations. Inside jokes. Late-night conversations about the future. Plans we hadn't even said out loud yet, but both assumed would happen. And he was willing to throw all of it away, because he didn't trust me in a room with someone from my past. I looked at him for the long moment. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was looking at my partner. I felt like I was looking at someone who had already decided who I was, without asking me. "Then I guess we're done," I said. The silence that followed was deafening. "You don't mean that," he said. "I do." "You're throwing away 3 years over a reunion?" I shook my head slowly. "You threw it away the moment you told me you don't trust me." He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't let him. "I'm just accepting your decision." I slept on the couch that night, not because he asked me to, but because something between us had already broken, and I didn't want to pretend it hadn't. By the end of the week, I found a short-term sublet, packed the essentials, left behind everything that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. We still had 3 months left on the lease. I paid my half. Told him he could find a roommate, or not. I didn't ask. I didn't argue. I didn't look back. The reunion was 2 weeks away. And for the first time since that conversation, I felt something unexpected. Not regret, not doubt, but something quieter, something steadier. Like I had just stepped out of a room I didn't realize had been suffocating me. So I went, alone. I wish I could tell you I arrived at the reunion feeling triumphant. Like some woman in a movie who chooses herself, drives off with perfect hair, and never once looks back. That's not how it felt. I got there with a knot in my stomach and a hotel keycard digging into my palm because I was gripping it too tightly. The campus looked almost exactly the same. That was the first thing that hit me. The old brick buildings, the winding paths, the huge oak trees that had somehow gotten taller while the rest of us got older. The student center still had that same polished floor smell I remembered from late-night study sessions and club meetings and bad vending machine coffee. For one suspended second, I just stood there in the parking lot with my overnight bag at my feet and let the place wash over me. Not because I missed being young, because I missed who I had been before life got so careful, before every harmless thing needed to be explained, before every memory came with a defense attached to it. And maybe that was the first real clue that leaving Ethan had not been an impulsive act. Maybe some part of me had been tired long before the ultimatum. Friday night's mixer was held in one of the renovated alumni halls, all soft lighting and name tags and polite music, trying very hard to sound sophisticated. I almost turned around at the entrance. That's the part nobody talks about when you do something brave. Courage, in real life, is rarely elegant. Sometimes it just looks like standing in heels you regret wearing, questioning every life choice that led you to a folding table with a registration sheet and a woman named Diane smiling at you, like she has no idea you almost detonated your relationship 2 weeks ago. "Name?" she asked. "Madeline Harper." She found my badge, handed it over, and said, "Welcome back." Such a small sentence, but it did something to me. Welcome back. Not prove yourself, not explain why you came alone, not justify your choices. Just welcome back. The first hour was easier than I expected, then better than I expected. Then, somewhere around my second drink and my third, "Oh my God, I can't believe it's you," it became something else entirely. It became fun. Real fun. The kind that sneaks up on you when you stop monitoring yourself. I found my old roommate near the bar, arguing passionately with someone from our economics department about whether the campus coffee had always been that terrible, or whether nostalgia had just erased the evidence. I ran into 2 women from a student volunteer organization I'd practically lived in during junior year. One of them hugged me so hard I almost spilled my wine. We traded stories. Who moved where, who got married, who got divorced, who had kids, who changed careers, who somehow still laughed exactly the same. And every time I caught myself smiling, really smiling, I felt this odd mix of relief and grief. Relief that I had come. Grief that someone who claimed to love me had wanted to keep me from this. Bum. The formal fear, of course, had a face. His name was Daniel, my college ex-boyfriend. And yes, I saw him. Of course I did. Not dramatically. No slow-motion moment. No cinematic music. No devastating eye contact across a crowded room. He was standing near a photo display with his wife, one hand holding a drink, the other resting casually at the small of her back. I recognized him immediately, but what startled me most was how little I felt. Not nothing. Just distance. Time. Like looking at a chapter of a book I had finished years ago. He noticed me a minute later and smiled, in that polite, slightly surprised way people do when they see someone they once knew intimately in a completely different lifetime. "Madeline?" "Hey, Daniel." We hugged lightly, awkward but kind. He introduced me to his wife, Hannah, who was warm and easy and very obviously not threatened by my existence. They had a 6-year-old daughter, and within 2 minutes he was showing me photos of her in a ladybug costume and telling me she had somehow inherited his inability to sit still. I congratulated him. He asked how life had been. I said busy, a little chaotic lately, but good. He laughed softly. That sounds about right for 30. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. Maybe. Then someone called his name from another table. Hannah squeezed his arm, and he said, "It was really good to see you." "You too." And that was it. That was the great danger. That was the man Ethan had imagined as some kind of unfinished temptation. A pleasant conversation, a few family photos, 2 adults acknowledging a shared past and moving on without sparks, drama, or regret. I stood there afterward with my drink in my hand and had the most absurd urge to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so painfully, almost offensively uneventful. All that suspicion, all that pressure, all that damage. For 5 harmless minutes, and a photo of a child dressed like an insect. But Daniel wasn't the part of that weekend that stayed with me. Not even close. The part that stayed with me was someone else. His name was Luke Bennett. Back in college, Luke had orbited the edge of my social world without ever stepping fully into it. He was part of the same extended friend group. At parties sometimes, club events sometimes, campus fundraisers, mutual birthdays. The kind of person you always recognized and always liked, even if you'd never had the chance to know him deeply. He'd been quieter back then, observant, the kind of man who seemed to listen more than he spoke. At the reunion, though, something had shifted, not in a flashy way. He still wasn't loud, still wasn't the center of the room. But he felt more open now, more grounded in himself. I first really talked to him Friday night, when I was trying unsuccessfully to balance a plate of appetizers and a drink, while also pretending not to read the embarrassing slideshow of old student photos behind the bar. He appeared beside me and said, "I think that picture of you in the background is evidence you once owned 3 scarves for no reason." I turned and stared at him, then at the screen. And there I was, 20, laughing too hard at something off camera, wearing a ridiculous layered outfit that absolutely included at least one unnecessary scarf. I laughed so suddenly I nearly dropped my drink. "Oh my God." "I'm sorry," he said, already smiling. "I saw it and knew I had about 4 seconds before you noticed." "That's evil. That's friendship. We were not close enough in college for you to weaponize my fashion choices." He tilted his head. "That sounds like regret." And just like that, the conversation unfolded, effortlessly. We talked for over an hour that night, not in a flirtatious, high-stakes way, not with sparks flying and the universe rearranging itself. It was quieter than that, better than that. We talked like people who had become more themselves since the last time they met, about where life had taken us, about jobs that looked impressive on paper and felt hollow in real life, about aging parents and changing friendships, and the weird, disorienting feeling of realizing your 20s are no longer close enough to touch. At one point he asked, "So where's your boyfriend?" There it was, the question I'd been dodging all evening. I could have lied. I could have said he couldn't make it. I could have dressed the truth up in something softer and less humiliating. Instead, maybe because the night had made me feel honest, I said, "We broke up 2 weeks ago." Luke didn't pounce on the information, didn't ask invasive questions, didn't do that performative sympathy thing some people do when they sense drama. He just said, "I'm sorry, that's still fresh." "It is." Then, after a beat, he added, "You still came." I looked at him. "Yeah." He nodded once, like that told him something important about me. And maybe it did. Saturday afternoon, after a panel I barely paid attention to, and a campus tour that mostly made everyone feel ancient, I ran into Luke again outside the student union. He was holding 2 coffees. "I bought this before remembering I only have 2 hands," he said, lifting one cup slightly. "Help me justify my poor planning." I took it. "Is this charity?" "This is logistics." We ended up sitting on a bench near the fountain where students were still cutting across campus like time hadn't passed at all. The conversation deepened there. Maybe because daylight makes people more honest. Maybe because neither of us was trying to impress the other. He told me about the relationship he'd just gotten out of. A 2-year situation that had ended badly enough that he described it with a laugh that clearly meant it still hurt. I didn't press. I just listened. Then, without planning to, I told him a little more about Ethan. Not everything. Just enough. The ultimatum. The distrust. The moment I realized I couldn't build a future with someone who needed control more than faith. Luke was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That sounds exhausting." It was such a simple word. Not dramatic, not sensationalized, not, "Wow, he sounds insane." Just exhausting. And that was exactly what it had been. Like living inside an emotional courtroom, where I was always one misunderstood detail away from being put on trial. "Yeah," I said softly. It was. Nothing happened that weekend. Nothing romantic. No kiss under string lights. No reckless rebound moment. No emotional cheating hidden under nostalgia. That matters. Because the truth was slower than that. Safer. More respectful. We exchanged numbers before Sunday brunch, because by then it would have been stranger not to. "Text me sometime," he said. "I probably will." Very confident. "I'm trying a new thing, where I pretend I'm socially effortless." He smiled. "Let me know how it goes." At brunch, we sat at different tables for most of the meal, calling across to mutual friends and laughing at stories I'd heard before, but somehow enjoyed more now. At one point, I looked up and caught him glancing in my direction. Not intensely, not possessively, just warmly, like he was glad I was there. It startled me how much that look alone felt different from the relationship I had just left. No suspicion, no claim, no pressure, just presence. After the reunion, we started texting, then calling, then finding reasons to meet for dinner. Luke lived about 90 minutes away, which in another season of my life might have felt inconvenient. But after Ethan, inconvenience felt almost luxurious compared to emotional instability. There was no rush. That was the beauty of it. We were both bruised enough to recognize the value of patience. He'd text me things that made me laugh in the middle of work meetings. I'd call him during long drives and realize an hour had passed without effort. He remembered details, asked follow-up questions, never made ordinary things feel suspicious. When I mentioned running into an old male coworker for coffee one afternoon, he said, "Nice. Was it good?" And that was the entire conversation. The first time that happened, I almost didn't know how to respond. No interrogation, no shift in tone, no hidden test, just trust. Like I was a person, not a potential betrayal waiting to happen. 3 months later, we were officially dating. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of those weeks, I began to understand something I hadn't known while I was with Ethan. Healthy love does not feel like constant damage control. It does not require you to shrink your world to prove your loyalty. It does not punish you for having a past. Luke was smart, funny, thoughtful, and secure in a way that made everything around him feel less chaotic. He didn't need to monitor me to feel connected to me. He didn't confuse fear with devotion. He didn't ask me to become smaller so he could feel bigger. And maybe the most unexpected part of all of it was that none of this would have happened if I had stayed home, if I had obeyed the ultimatum, if I had chosen comfort over clarity, if I had mistaken control for love one more time. The reunion did not ruin my life. It revealed it. And by the time the first photos of Luke and me started appearing online, tagged dinners, shared weekends, normal little moments that looked harmless to everyone else, I had already begun building something gentler than what I'd lost. Something steadier. Something Ethan was never going to take well. I didn't think about Ethan much during those first few months after the reunion. Not because I was trying to avoid it, but because my life quietly moved forward. That's the strange thing about walking away from something that drains you. Once you're out, you don't always feel the need to keep revisiting the room you escaped. The first message came 3 days after the reunion. "Looks like you're having a great time without me." I saw it while I was waiting in line for coffee. Read it once, then locked my phone and slid it back into my bag like it didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't respond, not out of spite, just because I didn't have anything left to say. The second message came later that night. "I see you found time for your ex. Guess I was right about you." That one made me pause, not because it hurt, but because it was so disconnected from reality that it almost felt like he was talking about a completely different person. I still didn't reply, because engaging would mean stepping back into the version of me that had to explain everything. And I was done being cross-examined in my own life. By the time the reunion photos started circulating, group shots, candid laughs, a blurry one of me mid-sentence with a drink in my hand, his messages had shifted from pointed to passive-aggressive. "I hope you're happy with your choice." I guess 3 years didn't mean much. You moved on pretty fast. That last one came later, 3 months later, right after Luke and I officially started dating. "Are you seriously seeing someone already?" I stared at the message longer than the others, not because I felt guilty, but because I could feel something else coming, something heavier. "I'm not sure why that's your concern," I finally replied. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. "Because we were together for 3 years, Madeline." "You gave me an ultimatum," I wrote back. "You told me you didn't trust me. I accepted that." I didn't end things. I let out a quiet breath through my nose. "You told me if I went to the reunion, we were done." "You chose a stupid reunion over me." I read that sentence twice, and something in me settled. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. I chose self-respect over being controlled, I typed, and I would make the same choice again. He didn't respond after that, but he didn't disappear either. That would have been too simple. About 2 weeks later, the messages started coming from other people. Not directly accusing, not confrontational, just careful. "Hey, just checking in, heard some stuff, you okay?" I didn't want to assume anything, but "Is everything good on your end? Someone said you were already seeing someone else before the breakup?" I remember sitting on my couch one night, my phone in my lap, reading through 3 separate conversations that all felt like they were orbiting the same unspoken question. What really happened? And that's when I realized Ethan wasn't just messaging me anymore. He was talking. According to his version of events, I had been emotionally cheating on him for months. He told people I was obsessed with my college ex, that I talked about him constantly, that I had been looking for an excuse to reconnect, that the reunion had just been the perfect opportunity. And Luke? Apparently Luke wasn't a coincidence. In Ethan's story, Luke was the plan. Someone I had been lining up quietly in the background before ending things. I sat there in silence after hearing all of it, because there's something deeply unsettling about hearing your own life rewritten by someone who used to know you intimately. It's not just frustrating, it's disorienting. like watching someone take your memories and rearrange them into something unrecognizable. None of it was true, not even a little. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in years. I barely remembered Luke beyond vague group settings until that weekend. There had been no planning, no emotional overlap, no secret conversations, just a woman who refused to stay in a relationship built on suspicion, and a connection that happened after she left it. But truth, I learned, doesn't always travel as fast as a good story. I handled it the only way I knew how. I didn't chase it, didn't try to correct every version, didn't launch my own counter-narrative. When people asked me directly, I told them the truth. Simple, clean, unembellished. We broke up because he gave me an ultimatum about attending my college reunion. I went anyway. That was it. No character assassination. No defensive monologues. Just facts. Some people believed him. Some believed me. Most landed somewhere in the middle and quietly decided it wasn't their problem. And honestly, that was fine, because the people who needed to understand me already did. I lost a few acquaintances. People who had always been more connected to Ethan than to me. People who didn't ask questions before forming opinions. But the friendships that mattered didn't shift. If anything, they clarified. One of my closest friends said, "Maddie, anyone who's spent 5 minutes with you knows you're not that person." And I realized she was right. I didn't need to prove my character to people who had already decided not to see it. Then it escalated, because it always does. Luke found me in the kitchen one evening while I was making dinner. "Hey," he said gently, holding out his phone. "Your ex reached out to me." My stomach dropped. "Are you serious?" He nodded, scrolling slightly before handing it over. The message was exactly what I expected. Calculated concern wrapped in accusation. "You should know what you're getting into. She's not who you think she is. She was emotionally cheating on me for months. She's obsessed with her college ex. I'm just trying to warn you before you waste your time." I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. Not embarrassment. Something sharper. Violation. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately. "You shouldn't have to deal with this. Maddie." His voice stopped me. Calm. Steady. I looked up. "You don't need to handle anything," he said. "This isn't your mess to clean up." I blinked. "She's clearly not okay," he continued. "I'm just going to block her and move on." "That's it?" "That's it." No suspicion. No hesitation. No subtle shift in how he looked at me. Just trust. Clean and uncomplicated. That moment did something to me, because it showed me, in real time, the difference between two kinds of love. One that sees conflict and looks for someone to blame, and one that sees conflict and chooses not to let it poison something good. I did reach out to Ethan one last time, not for closure. I already had that, but because there are lines that shouldn't be crossed without consequence. "I know you've been messaging Luke," I wrote. The reply came quickly. I was trying to warn him. "No," I said. "You were trying to sabotage my relationship. You ruined my life, Madeline." I closed my eyes for a second. There it was, the narrative he needed to survive. "We were supposed to get married," he continued, "have kids, build something real, and you threw it all away." "We never talked about marriage," I replied. "We never discussed kids. You're rewriting history. I am the victim here. You gave me an ultimatum. You chose a reunion over me. I chose not to be controlled." There was a pause. "Then, you're going to regret this when he leaves you." I stared at the message. "You're going to realize what you lost." And suddenly I didn't feel angry anymore. Just done. Completely, unmistakably done. I didn't respond. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. I blocked his number, his social media, everything. Total silence. Luke blocked him too. No drama. No discussion. Just removal. And just like that, the noise stopped. Or at least, the direct noise did. Because people like Ethan don't always stop talking. They just find new audiences. And I had a feeling this wasn't the end of his version of the story. 5 months after the reunion, everything felt quieter. Not perfect, but settled. Like the dust had finally stopped trying to convince me it was a storm. Luke and I were good. Not in the dramatic, all-consuming way people mistake for passion. In a steadier way, a calmer way. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself every 5 minutes. He had met my parents. I had met his. We had started having those small, almost casual conversations about the future, the kind that don't feel like pressure, just possibility. "Would you ever move closer to the city? Do you see yourself staying in your current job long term? What kind of place would you want if you didn't have to compromise?" Nothing intense, nothing rushed, just two people slowly mapping out whether their lives could fit together. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place in someone else's life. That was the biggest difference. With Ethan, I was always adjusting, monitoring, filtering, There were entire parts of my life I learned not to mention because they would somehow turn into problems. A male coworker texting me about a project, a casual lunch with friends he didn't know, a memory from college that involved someone he couldn't place. Everything had the potential to become a question, and every question carried an edge. With Luke, there were no edges. If I said, I grabbed coffee with an old friend, he'd ask if it was good coffee. If I mentioned a male colleague, he didn't go quiet or shift the conversation into something investigative. He just trusted me, not blindly, but naturally. Like trust was the default setting, not something I had to constantly re-earn. It changed the way I moved through my own life. I spoke more freely, laughed more easily, stopped rehearsing explanations in my head before saying something out loud. And it made me realize something I wish I had understood earlier. If a relationship feels like constant damage control, it's already broken. The social fallout eventually sorted itself out. It always does. The people who believed Ethan's version of events without ever asking me about it faded. Quietly. Naturally. No confrontation. No dramatic endings. Just distance that revealed what had always been fragile to begin with. And the people who knew me, really knew me, stayed. One of my friends said something that stuck with me. People who want drama will believe the most dramatic version of a story. People who know you won't. That turned out to be true. Ethan's whispers lost momentum when they stopped getting reactions. Without attention, there was nothing left to feed them. Wow. But he didn't stop entirely. Of course he didn't. People like Ethan don't need truth. They need a version of reality that protects their pride. About 3 weeks ago, one of our mutual friends reached out. Hey, she said, I thought you might want to know. Ethan's in a new relationship. I leaned back against my couch, phone in hand. Oh? Yeah. Someone he met at a work conference. They've been together like 6 weeks, and he's already posting about how he finally found someone who prioritizes him. I let out a small breath. Not a laugh. Not quite. Good for him, I said. And I meant it. At least I thought I did. There was a pause on the other end. Also, she added carefully, he's been telling people that you couldn't handle a real relationship, that you weren't ready for commitment. That made me smile. Not bitterly, not even angrily, just knowingly. Because of course he was. Of course, in his version of the story, I was the one who walked away from something real. Of course, he had become the man who simply wanted to be loved properly. Of course, I had become the cautionary tale. I leaned my head back and actually laughed this time. Soft. Genuine. Because there was something almost predictable about it. This man had tried to stop me from attending a reunion because he couldn't handle the idea of my past existing in the same space as my present. He had given me an ultimatum and been shocked when I didn't fold. He had spent months trying to rewrite the narrative when things didn't go his way. And now he was rewriting it again, just for a different audience. People don't really change, I said quietly. They just adjust the story depending on who's listening. My friend exhaled. That's actually a really good way to put it. I hope he finds what he's looking for, I added. And this time I knew I meant it. Not because I cared what happened to him, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not understanding, not accountability, not even closure. I already had all of that. The reunion photos are still on my social media. I haven't taken them down. Not the group shots, not the blurry candids, not even the ones Ethan used as evidence when he was trying to convince people I had betrayed him. Especially not those. Because when I look at them now, I don't see what he saw. I don't see disloyalty, or disrespect, or the beginning of the end. I see something else entirely. There's one photo in particular. Sunday brunch. Someone had said something ridiculous, and I was mid-laugh, head tilted back slightly, eyes half closed, completely unguarded. Luke is next to me in the frame, looking at me like he's not even listening to the conversation anymore. Just watching, not in a possessive way, not in a suspicious way, in a calm, quiet way, like he's exactly where he wants to be. And when I look at that picture now, months later, I don't think about Ethan. I don't think about the argument, or the ultimatum, or the version of me who almost stayed. I think about what that moment represents. A woman who chose herself, even when it cost her something real. A woman who walked away from control without knowing what she would find on the other side. A woman who trusted that clarity would come if she was willing to sit in the discomfort long enough. Ethan looked at those same photos and saw betrayal. I look at them and see freedom. That's the difference between us. Ready? Luke called from the doorway, grabbing his keys. Yeah, I said, slipping my phone into my bag. Where are we going again? I asked, standing up. New place downtown, he said. Apparently their tacos are incredible. I smiled. High stakes. Very. Life doesn't usually end with a dramatic speech or a perfect sense of closure. Most of the time, it just keeps going. Quieter, lighter, better. And if you're lucky, you realize somewhere along the way that choosing yourself was never the risk. Staying was.
Me.
Time to go.